Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasting.
Grab your marshmallows and sleeping bags for the Burnt Marshmallows podcast, where cozy mysteries come alive around the crackling campfire. Picture yourself wrapped in a warm blanket, sipping hot cocoa as we share spooky tales that will whisk you away to a world of mystery, ghosts, and perhaps even an occasional monster. Crime-solving spirits, urban legends, Bigfoot, we've got it all. Join Burnt Marshmallows every Tuesday, wherever you listen to podcasts for cozy mysteries.
Devil is on his way, devil is on his way. Devil is on his way, motherfucker, the devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees, devil is on his way. Fall to your knees, devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees, devil is on his way. Motherfucker, he's on his way.
Hey y'all, welcome back to Mountain Murders. I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan.
Hey Dylan, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm very well. Let's give a big shout out to our newest supporter at Patreon, and that is Tattooed and Employed.
Tattooed and Employed heeded the call. Come to our Patreon.
Hell yeah, brother.
That's right.
I also want to give a big shout out to Nellie from the Land Down Under.
Yeah.
She sent us a really sweet email, Dylan.
I want to go to
I
Australia.
know. I told her, I was like, that's on our bucket list. Like, we would love to visit Australia.
Can we stay at Nellie's house?
We're going to crash on Nellie's couch.
Yes.
Make sure you stock up with snacks, Nellie.
Yes, I'll send a list of pre-approved snacks.
But if you would like to send us an email, we usually try to respond to those. mountainmurderspodcast@gmail.com.
No, but we do love to hear from our listeners.
We do.
And,
And it's always exciting to hear like where people are from that are listening into the show.
yeah, I know.
Like when Nellie said she was from Australia, it's like, wow, okay, cool. I mean, I know we have international listeners, but it's kind of cool to actually hear from those folks.
Can you believe somebody from the
She
land
said she
down...
loves our accents.
Yeah, I know. Listens to a
I was
couple...
like, that's funny because we would probably love your accent.
Hey, hello.
Please,
I'll probably lose listeners every time I do that. I'm sorry.
please don't do it.
It's offensive.
I need to update you on something. Other folks have reached out to me, Dylan, and they wanted me to tell you you're dead ass wrong. A lot of people leave the plastic seal on sour cream and different types of products.
I don't believe it.
They do. So we're not monsters, Dylan. We're out here in the world.
So
We're everywhere.
So what you're saying is I'm the monster
Yeah.
for peeling it off and discarding it.
Well, I'm just saying, I'm not in a minority. There's a lot of folks out there who be peeling the lids and leaving them on, Dylan.
They're keeping the
half
seals.
peel, keeping the seals on there. All right, Dylan, are you ready to get into today's case? This one it's a very strange crime story. It takes years to get a resolution. And I'm surprised we haven't heard more about this case.
Really?
Doesn't seem like there's a lot of podcast attention when it comes to this case. So we're going to shine a little light on it.
They're too busy doing like John Wayne Gacy and Ted Bundy.
Are you ready?
Yeah, but here at Mountain Murders, you get the lesser known cases. Let's go.
Hellen Griffin Hanks was described as an intelligent, hardworking mother of three, happily married for 16 years. She was born in Morven, Georgia, the only daughter of 5 children born to parents Turner and Maddie Griffin.
The only daughter of 5 children?
Yeah. So she had
four brothers.
Yes.
Oh, it took me a second to catch up.
Dylan can math. To parents Turner and Maddie Griffin, Helen's great-grandfather had settled in the rural area of Brooks County after the Civil War. The Griffin family scratched out a living farming. They raised corn, cotton, and tobacco, which many of us folks from the South, that's part of our family history.
Those are all commodities.
I was going to say a lot of our poor families in the South were just farmers trying to scratch out a living.
It's funny because, the price of cigarettes and tobacco products has just constantly went up. But as I got older, I did notice less and less fields of tobacco, around me in the areas where I grew up. So it makes you wonder if people, because obviously farmers do what makes money, what makes them money. And if people stop growing a product because they can't really, they don't like the price they're selling it for, what the hell?
It's likely hard to compete with big growers, the industrialized tobacco farming.
You think that's what it is?
Probably. I mean, my great-grandparents, they farmed tobacco. And I remember as a kid, we had a tobacco barn where the tobacco would hang.
Yeah.
And my mom, I interviewed my mom, and I believe it's on either on Patreon or maybe I released it to the public. And she talks about, working tobacco as a kid. I think it's just something that maybe kind of fell out of style. It's hard to compete with those big corporations that are growing tobacco.
Right.
And then on top of it, I think the reason it's so expensive is, aren't a lot of states like super taxing the tobacco products?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of that. And that's why the prices vary wildly, from state to state.
Man, I know we have friends who are smokers, and they were telling us a couple weeks ago that a carton of cigarettes is $100.
Yeah.
That just blows my mind.
Dude, I remember when it was like $40.
I remember when it was like $25.
I've
never been a smoker, but I had multiple family members who were smokers, like my Nana, and she would buy cartons, and, it would be like $20-$25 when I was a kid.
That's crazy.
And I remember back then thinking that was expensive. And she would explain, well, you're getting X amount of cigarettes or whatever.
Yeah.
Because I'd just be like, I wouldn't pay that much to smoke cigarettes.
Well, and then if you buy it by the pack, you're spending more than the carton price.
Well, I know.
So, yeah, that just goes to show how much, honestly, I think that's just a key indicator of the buying power of the dollar and inflation in general.
So we're going to get back on track here. The whole family, including the children, had to pitch in when it was time to plant and harvest the crops. And by the time Helen was a teenager, she was 5'9", which is pretty tall in my humble opinion.
Well, that's pretty tall for a female, right?
Yes. Especially when you're only 5'3", 5'9", seems like a giant. Yeah. She excelled in athletics, especially basketball. She was also a good student, like a straight A student. In 1956, when Helen was 18 years old, she married James Harold Hanks. Most of their marriage, James was employed in the field of law enforcement. And as the family expanded, money was tight. Helen took on jobs as a secretary or in various clerical positions. She also took classes at a vocational school part-time while caring for her young family. So she's a go-getter. She's got a young family, she's working full-time, and she's still managing to take part-time classes.
Damn. That's dedication right there.
Yeah. This is why Shaka Khan says she's every woman, man. They were writing about Helen. Helen had been employed for 10 years as a secretary and bookkeeper with the Langdale Company, a large lumber mill. In early 1972, Helen was offered a job by a man named Foxy Wilcox.
That does not sound real.
Do you trust a man named Foxy Wilcox?
No.
Ooh, Foxy. He promised her $120 a week, which was a 20% increase in wages, trying to lure Helen over to his company.
He just needs her bookkeeping skills.
Valdosta, Georgia was established officially in 1860, and we're going to talk about Valdosta. That's where our case primarily takes place, Dylan. The Atlantic and Gulf Railroad was connected to Valdosta that year, which helped industrialize the once agriculturally reliant community. In 1897, the second Coca-Cola bottling plant opened in the area. 2 years later, a cotton mill was built in nearby Bremerton. In 1910, Fortune magazine ranked Valdosta as the richest city in America by per capita income.
Wow.
This was mostly attributed to the cotton mill. However, a bull weevil invasion of the South killed much of the cotton crop in 1917. That's when farmers turned to tobacco and pine timber. Doc Holliday spent much of his youth in Valdosta. I thought that was interesting.
Well, yeah, that's one of the biggest legends in the Wild West, right?
Yeah, he says he'll be your huckleberry. He does not offer to be your little old evil boll weevil, though.
Well, damned old bull weevils done killed my cotton plants.
Country singer Rhett Akins grew up in Valdosta, along with Ben Hayslip, a two-time country music songwriter of the year. Billy Joe Royal was also born in the southern city. And parts of Fannie Flagg's novel Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe and the film were set in Valdosta. I just thought those were some fun facts for folks
Well, yeah, it sounds like it's a...
who may not be familiar with Valdosta.
Well, it sounds like a place that kind of embodies just like the small town community kind of feel, you know what I mean?
Sounds like a place where you might do the watermelon crawl. Born Ernest Keller Wilcox Sr., the son of a respected local attorney, he earned the nickname Foxy as a child. Like his father and brother, Foxy chose law as a profession. He attended the University of Alabama and earned admission to the Georgia Bar in 1932. Foxy continued to thrive in 1945 when he married Russell Plowden, who was heir to the Plowden fortune. So he marries into money. A few years later, they welcomed a son named Keller Wilcox Jr. Foxy didn't have a great passion for law and kind of floated to other interests. By 1948, he had abandoned a law career just absolutely, like, he was over it, Dylan. And that year, he purchased the Wilcox Outdoor Company. The business was known primarily for erecting billboards along the state's growing highway system. Foxy renamed the business Wilcox Outdoor Advertising.
Yeah, and that'd been like cutting edge media at the time, you know what I mean?
The
Like
position suited Foxy. He was an excellent salesman. He served more than 2 decades as an officer with the Georgia Outdoor Advertising Association.
You know, it seemed like it was a lot easier to become a lawyer back then.
You think so?
Well, yeah. Don't you?
Maybe. I don't know. I've never taken the bar at present day, and I didn't take it in 1932, so I could not tell you if it's easier.
Okay.
Perhaps.
Yes.
Perhaps.
That's what a lawyer would say.
First Lady Bird Johnson wanted to eliminate billboards and outdoor advertising along America's highways and instead fill the areas with green landscaping and wildflowers. Lady Bird once said, quote, "Ugliness is so grim."
Now, I've seen some states that have these beautification projects, and I think some of it's pretty cool. You know what I mean? But I also wonder about the expenditure of taxpayer money on these types of projects. Of course, I'm not.
Planting wildflower seeds, you think it's just costing the taxpayer a fortune?
Well, I mean, there is upkeep and preparation. Now, you'll see these fences. Now, this is what, just in the middle of a median for no reason, right?
Decorative fencing.
And that's significant cost in that type of project. And it doesn't serve a purpose. It's just pretty to look at.
All right, so moving back to our story, Dylan, Foxy Wilcox staunchly opposed this move. In the end, he helped save the advertising medium from extinction along the roadsides. Wilcox's company grew not only in Georgia, but also into North Florida. By the 1970s, the company had active accounts in over 50 markets.
Well, of course he opposed it because his entire livelihood's tied to that type of business. So that makes sense.
Yeah, that's how it works, yeah. Foxy and Russell moved and continued upgrading to finer homes, eventually buying near the exclusive Valdosta Country Club. Keller, their only son, was described as, quote, "an unremarkable child."
Wow. That's a hell of a way to describe a kid.
In the 8th grade, his parents elected to send him to Admiral Farragut Academy in St. Petersburg, Florida. At the school, Keller was described as a model student who participated in intramural sports and was on the yearbook committee. When seniors were asked to name their idols, Keller listed Hugh Hefner, the publisher of Playboy magazine, as his hero.
Well, I think that's back then, Hugh led a what many considered to be a privileged lifestyle, glamorous, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely.
Just
He
lounging around the pool
in a
and all this.
smoking jacket.
Yeah.
Right? Hanging out with bunnies all day.
Yeah, but the bunnies, they all look the same. You know, they're all very,
They didn't always.
really.
No, if you look back through Playboy's history, they once had very distinct and unique looks about them.
Each one
Well,
individually.
it seems to me, not that I'm a Playboy aficionado or anything, but I did have this really amazing coffee book, like a photography book that was 50th anniversary Playboy edition or whatever. And so when you would look back over the years, I mean, there were a lot of different types of women, different ethnicities. Everybody kind of had a different look. And it seems, I would say maybe in the mid 90s, early 2000s is when it became this sort of homogenized look where they were all blonde, super bleach blonde.
Right.
And then you had the bunny show, the reality show. So I think that's kind of when they all started to look alike.
Well, I would prefer the times when it was, like you said, people had more unique looks and there was a variety.
Yeah, I bet.
Of artistic pictures.
I'm sure.
I
just read Playboy for the articles.
Yeah, but dude, you was going through your book, moving a bookshelf the other day, and there's bam, there's Shannon Tweed's edition of Playboy. And I was like, what?
I don't know how.
Why do you have
came
this?
to my possession. I don't know. I would, on occasion, pick them up at antique or vintage stores.
So then I read a few articles, right quick.
Because I would gift the Playboys to friends like Dolly Parton or something like that, for a Christmas gift. People I knew that would appreciate if it was a certain celebrity or someone on the cover.
Right.
Right. That's why I have it.
That makes sense.
Not because I'm a huge Shannon Tweed fan.
When I was a young...
I love her 80s movies.
When I was a young man, a very, very young man, I guess you could consider me a Shannon Tweed fan.
Well, yeah, you were probably up all night with that.
All right.
Okay, moving along, Dylan. We're not going to talk about your erections, only when we're erecting billboards. So in 1969, Keller moved back into his parents' home to attend Valdosta State. Initially, the young man pursued a career in medicine. That changed to business administration, and by his third year, he dropped out completely. He hoped to take over his aging father's company. I have to say, Keller strikes me as the original, the OG, don't you know who my father is guy?
Have you not seen my father's whimsical advertisements along the interstate?
I mean, he just sounds like a spoiled rich kid.
He's unremarkable.
He was unremarkable. He's spoiled, grew up in the lap of luxury, and his role model's Hugh Hefner.
Right.
So he considers himself probably something of a ladies' man.
And he aspires to just take over something his dad's already built up and
Instead of building his own business.
Right.
Yeah, he just wants to resume a position within the family business so he can maintain that lifestyle he's accustomed to, right?
Yeah.
Keller was given a full-time position at Wilcox Outdoor Advertising. Keller was set to take over the company. He owned the land on which the company was located. It had been set up in a trust fund for him at the age of 9. He would gain full ownership at the age of 25. He also had met a Valdosta State student named Jean King, and the pair were set to wed in August of 1972. Jean's father was a mechanic and part-time employee of the advertising company. Despite their socioeconomic differences, the young couple appeared to be head over heels in love. After the wedding, Keller assumed the day-to-day management, taking over his father's primary job. The company employed an all-black staff at the time who handled the actual work of erecting billboards, changing the signage, and the general maintenance. Most of the employees had been with the company for years. In January of 1972, Foxy hired 34-year-old Hellen Hanks as the company secretary. Foxy made a management deal around this time with Lamar Outdoor Advertising of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Seeing that his son was still green behind the ears, Foxy and Keller were set to meet with executives on August 30th in Atlanta to kind of like officially make this deal.
Yeah, that's something you hear less and less of this nowadays is people who've been with a company for years and years. And I think that really goes to show or prove that if you treat your employees well, and they stick around for years and they build up an expertise that you can only get from experience and having done something for a very long time, and it makes I think that makes that company better. But nowadays it seems like the more and more it's just these high turnover jobs where you're just a warm body, and they don't care. They don't care if they piss you off or treat you like dirt and you quit because there's 20 other people, waiting to try that job out too.
Yes, I agree with you on that, Dylan. So with this opportunity, Lamar will kind of help manage the company, I guess, until Keller grows into a better understanding of the company. But this would also open doors for advertising, growing the business, maybe getting into more Florida, Alabama, Tennessee. So, they're thinking even more expansion and dollar signs.
See, I've seen that Lamar name on billboards all over multiple states.
The same day that they were set to meet executives in Atlanta, Hellen Hanks would be trained on a new computer-based accounting system. The father and son duo departed on August 29th in Foxy's green 1970 Lincoln Continental. First, which, by the way, I'm just imagining this has got to be a slick car.
Oh, yeah.
Remember back in the day, cars had so much personality. The interior, it was like everything matched.
And they were just so well appointed and so luxurious.
Yeah.
You didn't
like
have
plush seats.
Yeah, even the regular cars had, different.
Like the velvety velour seating. And
I just don't know what happened to cars. Because
cars are ugly today.
Well, they've lost their personality. They all look very similar, right? Like you'll see iconic vehicles that you could always tell a Jaguar or a Land Rover or whatever. You could see it coming from 4 miles away and be like, wow, look at that, that's a Jaguar. And now you have to look closely to see even what it is,
because it could be a Kia.
Really,
for real. So they were first driving to Albany to check in at their office there. Then they headed to Atlanta via I-75. After dark, they checked into the Riviera Hyatt House in Atlanta. They had their business meeting and went out for dinner and drinks in underground Atlanta with the president of Lamar. The next morning, they dropped the executives off at the Atlanta airport, then on a whim decided to stop in Cordell to visit Willard King, Keller's new father-in-law. An hour later, they were back on the road, arriving in Valdosta around 4 p.m. After dropping off Keller, who then retained his own vehicle, the father and son duo, they headed to the office, and this was around 4:30. They were both surprised to find the office empty. The door was unlocked, the lights were on, and the radio was on, but Hellen Hanks was nowhere to be found.
Which I'm going to assume is abnormal.
Yes. Now, her car was parked in its usual spot with the key still in the ignition. Thinking she might be in the restroom, they waited a few minutes, then knocked on the door to make sure she was okay. She wasn't in the restroom, Dylan. After another search of the building, Keller walked next door to a convenience store to inquire if anyone had seen Hellen, like maybe she had popped in or they'd seen an ambulance come by, something. But no one had. So that's when he starts calling the hospital, thinking an emergency could have come up, but was told that no one by that name had been seen or admitted. Helen's husband, James, was contacted next. He worked at I know I'm going to not say this correctly. Lowndes Correctional Institution. Hellen usually arrived home around 5 p.m., but he had not heard from her yet. James told the Wilcoxes to phone law enforcement. That's when James left their home in Brooks County and arrived at the office around 5:25 p.m. Keller Wilcox was the only person at the office. He was sitting in Helen's chair, rummaging through her purse. Now, as a husband, Dylan, if I went missing and you walked in the office and my boss is sitting in my chair rummaging through my purse, what are you going to think about that?
Well, I would think that's weird.
Yeah,
Because
I think that's a bit of a red flag.
Well, that's her personal belongings.
Yes.
That is a very intimate space for most people. Much for a man, if someone was going completely through their wallet or something, you keep personal stuff there. It's kind of weird.
I find it strange. When James asked, what's going on, Keller said he was looking for a set of keys. That's when James took the purse, found the keys, and handed them to Wilcox. Keller said, quote, "She won't be needing these anymore."
What?
When police arrived, another search of the building was conducted, but there was nothing to indicate that Hellen Hanks was in the building or where she might be.
Now, am I to assume these were like keys to the business, maybe?
Probably. There were also no signs of a struggle or violence. None of the officers or James Hanks had seen Foxy Wilcox or his green Lincoln. So father and son arrive at the building. She's missing. But then when police and the husband show up, Foxy is gone.
Yeah, so you've come here and found one of your employees missing. You don't have any idea what's going on. But then you leave, and it's escalating now that if family members and the police are coming, you would imagine someone would stick around.
Helen was marked as a missing person. One thing law enforcement noted was that inside her purse, which contained normal items, her wallet, photos of her children and husband, there were a few job applications. Both applications included a start date indicating she would be available on October 1st of 1972. Hellen Hanks was planning to leave her job at Wilcox Outdoor Advertising. Now, she's only been there a short period. She's only been employed there for 6 months maybe?
Yeah.
And so this is showing that she's giving a month's notice before she leaves. So that's strange.
Well, that's interesting. It makes you wonder why. What did she not like about her current job?
Exactly, Dylan. She didn't like those billboards. Now, that evening, Foxy and Keller had dinner plans with their families at the exclusive Ocean Pond Fishing Club, which was located near the Florida line. Ocean Pond was described as, quote, a southern fish camp.
Ooh, for rich people.
The Wilcoxes were expected for cocktails at 7 p.m., followed by dinner. Keller told his wife Jean to go on to the party by herself, and he would arrive later. Foxy also called to say he was running late, so the father and son arrived 2 hours later, around 9 p.m. Jean was surprised when her new husband, whom she hadn't seen in 2 days, didn't immediately acknowledge her. When he walked into Ocean Pond, he spent 20 minutes talking to other guests before being seated next to his wife.
And he's very late.
Now, after you've been on a business trip, Dylan, which you never take a business trip, I feel like you would walk in and would first want to come greet me, right?
Well, of course. You're the main person that I would have missed.
You better say that.
Well, no, it's true, though.
Well, no. I feel like if we're apart any amount of time, you would be the first person I would make a beeline to say, hey, and look at your beautiful face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would come. I would mash my mouth against your mouth.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get some lovins.
Suck some face.
Some public displays of affection. Yeah.
You like that sound effect?
I don't know.
It's almost like an alien or, I don't know.
I feel like my ear needs
forceful kissing.
Ear needs a Plan B.
It does.
Peel or something.
Yeah.
Damn.
Ear sex. So at 10:30, when the party was over, Keller informed his wife that he needed to stop by the office to, quote, make sure everything was locked up. She fell asleep after arriving home, so Jean had no idea what time her husband returned. Those who knew Helen were completely dumbfounded by her missing person status. It was during the Valdosta Police's morning meeting on September 1st of 1972 that Assistant Chief Police Lois Arnold, Lois, what a name, first heard about her case. He served as the department's investigative officer, so they've only got one officer who does investigations.
He's got the investigation book. You'll have to wait till he gets down here.
Yes. He paid a visit later that morning to the Wilcox office. He found Foxy and Keller to be cooperative, sharing information about their schedule. However, they had no new information on Helen. He spent the next several days looking into Helen's whereabouts, retracing her steps, and interviewing the people who knew her. A couple who were sitting on their porch at 610 West Hill Avenue recalled seeing Helen get into a car with a male described as having a short, medium build, around 5'8" and maybe like 160 pounds. They recognized Helen and noted she seemed to be carrying something under her arm as she got into the car. The man was driving either a Cutlass or Skylark, light blue in color, with a dark blue or black vinyl top and an Alabama license plate.
Okay. Well, that's a pretty good description they're giving.
Foxy Wilcox was interviewed again and went over a timeline of the business trip to Atlanta. He did initially offer up this information, but said that 2 cash boxes were missing. So when police first arrived, nobody reported these cash boxes were gone.
It was just her.
She was missing.
Right.
But 2 cash boxes were missing, one containing receipts, and the other had about $52.40 cash in it.
Well, and
so hardly enough to run off and start a new life.
Well, and you could argue they didn't realize at first that the cash boxes were missing, right?
An employee named Jerry Davis was the last known person to see Helen alive on the morning of August 31st. Davis told the investigator he had seen Keller Wilcox pat Mrs. Hanks on the bottom once, and she had slapped him. Later, Davis overheard Keller Wilcox on the phone. He used, quote, bad words, referring to the secretary. His story was corroborated by an employee named John Goodman. Not to be confused with
the John Goodman.
Dan Connor. Arnold decided to look into the possibility that there had been an extramarital affair or some kind of marital problem between Helen and James. But after interviews with James, the Hanks' 2 oldest children, and friends, there was no sign of marital trouble. There was a consensus that Helen was not happy in her job at Wilcox. Arnold concluded Helen had likely gotten tired of her job, had her fill of James Hanks, and simply left town for a bit. She's going to live high on the hog on that $52.
You know how far that'd go back then?
Woo! She's going to party it up in, Miami? Now, a week passed with no sign of Helen. She had a hair appointment on August 31st after work and didn't cancel or show up, which was very unlike her. She was also due to take her typewriter to a repair shop that afternoon, but it was still in Helen's car when she vanished. There were no phone calls to family or friends, so for a whole week, they're just kind of waiting on the edge of their seats, worrying, not sure what's going on. On September 7th, the newspaper reported no leads in Helen's case despite a $1,000 reward being offered by the missing woman's family and friends. The man allegedly seen with Helen, driving this Cutlass or Skylark, was accounted for. He was actually the man from Alabama training Helen on the new computer system. So he was an employee of Lamar Advertising. He had been in town with Helen on August 30th, not the 31st, as the witnesses recalled. The missing cash boxes remained a puzzle. And a lot of time with eyewitness accounts, they can be fuzzy or lack proper information.
Right. Or, yeah. Well, it's because you're typically, unless it's you witnessed a violent crime or something, it's usually the mundane that you're recounting. And, who really makes a note of that? You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, and if it's someone you see frequently.
Right.
I couldn't tell you how many times I see the neighbors next door, but I probably wouldn't remember exactly what they were wearing or what day it was because my days all sort of blend together.
Yeah, or if you're in the yard sitting and looking and someone drives by and later on someone tries to get you to, describe them or who was in the car or what time it was, I mean, you're just not going to know those kinds of details. But I think people
most of the time.
Right. I think people just kind of want to be helpful.
They do want to be
typically,
helpful.
and they'll kind of just add in. Your brain will just add pieces to the story to kind of, fill it out, if you will.
Keller Wilcox's new father-in-law, who worked full-time at Pepsi Cola Bottling in Cordell, worked part-time on the weekends at Wilcox. He did maintenance on the small fleet of vehicles, mostly trucks that were used to erect those billboards, Dylan. King reported that on Saturday, September 9th, he found a spare poster box in the warehouse was missing. And these are pretty sizable boxes. Probably like 3 feet tall, 4 or 5 feet,
So is this what they
wide.
transport the signage in? Sounds like
Yeah,
maybe?
like paper and
Right.
that kind of thing. King told Keller and suggested they call the police since the box had gone missing around the same time as Hellen Hanks. Investigator Arnold, who had clearly the investigator handbook that day, checked the warehouse, kind of looking for this missing box. Of course, there were other boxes similar around, but he didn't really think it had anything to do with Helen's disappearance. Arnold didn't think Helen left in a box. He thought she left with a man.
Oh.
In the summer of 1972, there had been 2 more missing persons cases reported in Valdosta. A teenager had run away to Jacksonville, Florida. Another 46-year-old was reported missing. Her car turned up in Dade City, Florida. And these people were accounted for. So again, they might run off for a few days, but then they turn back up.
Right.
Drugs were on the rise in Valdosta at the time, and there had been a few high-profile murders. In Thomas County, there were 3 missing women. Governor Jimmy Carter sent a top investigator named Ronald Angel to look into these various missing persons cases. And that would include Helen's case. Angel considered Hellen Hanks a top priority. On October 11th, he interviewed Keller Wilcox. They spoke to him about the details of the Atlanta trip. Much of the information was confirmed already. Keller Wilcox denied ever patting Helen on the backside, nor that he had ever called her a bitch or a whore over the telephone.
Oh, that was the naughty words used?
Yeah. So eventually, Dylan, the trail just goes cold. James Hanks remarked years later, quote, "She might leave me, but she'd never have left the children." At first, Hanks and his mother tried to shield the children, 15-year-old Lucy, 13-year-old David, and 10-year-old Penny, from the news their mother had gone missing. After a few days, James felt overwhelmed. His children had never seen him cry, but Penny recalled him sitting on the living room sofa, which the children were not allowed to sit on,
Oh, it's the good furniture.
sobbing. I wonder if it has plastic on it. It's funny because back in the day, parents were so much more strict on kids than we are today. I mean, our kids will waller the hell out of our new furniture
Yeah.
and eat snacks, and we'll be like, that's a $1,500 couch, and our kids are just like, grinding shit into it.
Putting their shoes on it and stuff.
Yeah, no respect. But back in the day, kids weren't even allowed on the damn living room furniture.
Well, you know,
Sit your little ass on the floor.
I understand trying to shield the children, but they're going to literally notice their mom's missing. So, I mean, it's not going to last very long.
Well, as weeks passed, James had to deal with a real possibility he would never see his wife again.
I could not imagine.
What is that like?
I don't know. It would be maddening.
I think about that, what if you just went missing? I don't know if I could deal with that.
You wouldn't be happy
maybe for a few minutes.
for half a day?
Maybe for the first night.
Yeah.
When you're not snoring in my ear. But no, Dylan, I would be devastated.
Well, no,
I
just
wouldn't know what to do with myself.
any loved one, a child, a spouse, a sibling, whatever, a parent. I just can't imagine all of a sudden realizing that you've likely never see them again, and the last time you saw them, whatever interaction that might have been, is going to be it. And that's very strange and scary.
Baby, I ain't me without you.
Baby, I'm sorry last time you saw me, I farted.
Okay, I'm reconsidering.
See, I'm gonna come back as a ghost and be like, ooh. I'll be knocking like
and
the
then,
snacks
and then
over.
you'll be blaming it on Rufus.
Yeah.
It's what you do now.
No, that really was Rufus earlier.
I don't believe
It
it.
was. He looked at you. You could tell.
Rufus doesn't eat potato chips. That smelled
That's
like,
a damn
that
lie.
smelled like tater chips.
He loves crunchies.
Well, stop giving it to him. He's not supposed to have that. Money was tight once again. I mean, James depended on his wife's income to help support the family.
Well, I mean,
So
that's
again, that's also very difficult, navigating a single income household when you had two incomes.
and that's the other side of it that very quickly becomes a problem is when you're building this life together. Often, you're relying on each other, in various ways, including financially, and it's just all of a sudden gone.
Your island's in the stream.
You're definitely worth more to me alive. Just know that.
Well, yeah, who's going to pay the rent?
I'm saying.
You could pay the other bills, but then you wouldn't have a house to live in.
I know.
I mean, we really are very intertwined here, Dylan.
But if I don't have the house, then I'll have to pay the other bills. All
So
of a sudden,
one of
I'll
the
be
reasons we stay
rich.
together because I can't afford to divorce you.
That's not true.
Are you sure?
That's not true. They do it for like $50 online nowadays.
No, I just mean like, I couldn't afford to pay all the bills by myself.
Right. And that's what makes a loving relationship.
It's true.
Your financial interdependency on each other.
When you stay together because you're too poor to be apart.
I'll be like, look, man, I didn't kill her because I need her.
That's how you know you're in love. We're too poor to be without each other.
We're too poor to hurt each other. We need each other.
The four of them would have to pull together to make things work. He's sitting the children down and explaining to them their mother is gone. Helen had a savings account containing $193.13. The last deposit had been 6 months before she went missing. This remained untouched. So she's not pulling out
Accessing it.
savings.
Right.
I'm sorry. I'm looking out the window right now, and there's a beautiful red cardinal sitting atop of my motor cage.
And see, I told you
It's very distracting.
I had to pull the
Because
curtain.
I'm like, ooh, look, pretty bird. Oh, yeah. I have to focus.
She's like, why are you pulling the curtain? You want it to be dark in here? I was like, no, because I will be distracted by anything that happens outside.
See, it just happened.
Yeah.
A cardinal sitting atop the motor cage. It was beautiful. It was bright red. Lucy, being the eldest, took over the day-to-day chores of running the house. As Penny grew older, she recalled bits of conversations regarding Helen's job. At the time, she was 10 years old. She didn't really understand what was going on, but she remembered one time James telling his wife, quote, "I'll go down there and straighten him out."
Oh.
And Helen said, no, you can't do that. So later, Penny's like, what was that about?
Well, yeah, as you get older and kind of can apply context.
Well, yeah, and hearing stories, I'm sure. As the months dragged on, the children were subject to brutal teasing by other kids who told them their mother had run off with another man. There were reports that Helen had been seen in Florida, New York, and Bermuda.
Who in the hell would tease someone?
Your mama did run off with somebody else.
Your mama didn't love you. My daddy read in the newspaper that your mama didn't like you, and that's why she left.
You're the reason your mama run off with the UPS man.
I mean, who?
She liked them little shorts more than she liked you.
Talking about he brought her special delivery.
What the fuck is wrong with
I'm
kids?
trying to figure out what mongrel ass kid teases someone over the fact that their poor mom's gone, even if she did run RUNOFT. I mean, my gosh, how you going to pick on somebody over that? I mean, damn.
Kids will pick on each other over everything. They'll be like, your teeth is bucked. And it's like, well, I can't help it. My parents can afford braces. Kids are vicious. Years later, Penny would recall seeing a woman in Quitman, Georgia, who looked a lot like her mother and even moved like her. Penny followed this woman into a store and, of course, was sad when she realized it was not her mother. That's just like a really troubling thought.
It's very sad.
Of seeing, thinking this is your mother and following this stranger into a store. One of the hardest parts in the aftermath of Helen's disappearance came in mid-1973 when the children woke up to find a strange woman in the house. Within months, the old girlfriend from James's teenage years moved into their home along with her teenage son.
Oh, gosh.
So just suddenly, here's this woman and her kid just making a new family without really introducing
Or discussing
the relationship, explaining this to the children. I mean, that's got to be hard. Daddy's just here with his new woman.
Well, I mean, God, that'd be so weird. But, I don't know. I don't think I can say he's a terror. I wouldn't do that. I couldn't do that.
People's got needs, is what you're trying to say, maybe.
Yeah, he needs somebody to help him pay the lot bill.
Well, there's that. Lucy moved out to live with friends in Valdosta. I mean, she just did not like the situation at all with this new woman. She didn't feel like it was right. She ends up taking a job at a gas station to support herself. David and Penny were not welcoming to this new addition to the household. Unbeknownst to the children, James filed for divorce from his missing wife in spring of 1974, and it was granted on September 30th of 1974. What do you think about that?
I think it's kind of strange behavior, but I mean, who am I to judge, I guess?
But to secretly divorce your missing wife?
Well, that's because he knew he felt shameful about it or something like that.
That red bird's back.
He felt shameful for having done it like that. But I guess not too shameful, or he wouldn't have moved some woman in literally months after his wife's disappearance.
The Hanks children faced the tough reality of Helen's disappearance. And part of that is there was no money for college. The children actually had to take on jobs to make money. Because again, finances is tight.
Right.
Dad needs help. This consisted of brutal, hard labor on an uncle's farm. So all summer long, from dawn till dusk, these kids are laboring away, doing hard farm chores.
Damn.
Their uncle paid them enough to buy school supplies and a few new school outfits, I suppose. Keller Wilcox would phone Lucy sometimes asking, quote, "How's your mama?" Keller claimed the Hanks family knew Helen's whereabouts. An anonymous woman called the police department to say she was Helen living in Texas. And at one point, the police called Lucy to say they suspected she'd been in touch with her mother and were kind of interrogating her like, "You're lying to us. You know where she is.
You know your mama got that $52.38 out of that cash box.
She started a new life on that $52. Lucy married a few years after high school, but that marriage ended swiftly. David wanted to be an engineer. He worked for the railroad, driving spikes to earn money for college, but it simply wasn't enough. He joined the Navy, but he did become like a nuclear engineer, so he had success. And Lucy went on to like earn a master's degree.
Wow.
I mean, yeah. So, I mean, the kids were successful despite these problems. Penny earned a full scholarship to Georgia Southwestern College, which paid for everything from meals to housing. In the fall of 1979, Lucy hoped organizing a memorial would help heal the wounds left by their mother's disappearance. There was no evidence that Hellen Hanks was still alive. Family and friends gathered in Campground Cemetery near the family church in Morven to celebrate Helen's life. James chose not to attend. I find that a bit odd.
Well, it
if
is.
not to, simply support your children at this memorial.
Well, yeah, but, I mean, maybe people drift apart, or maybe he never was that close to them in the first place, even when Helen was alive. I mean, there's multiple reasons why that might go down like that.
Helen's disappearance had no impact on the Wilcox family, who continued to thrive financially. Eventually, Keller took on great responsibility within the company, assuming the title of president. He became a pillar of the community, joining the Chamber of Commerce and the Rotary Club. You know you're a pillar when you're a member of the Rotary Club. When you're a Rotarian,
Yeah.
you've arrived. He also took an interest in law enforcement after Helen's disappearance. He served as a volunteer auxiliary policeman. An acquaintance with the police department soon became a best friend. His name was Neil Johansson. So Neil Johansson and his wife became besties with Keller Wilcox and his wife Jean. And it didn't take long for Jean to leave her husband for the friend Neil.
Really?
Yeah.
Damn.
This is when things take a strange turn, Dylan. On March 12th of 1980, Jean returned from work to find all the doors locked inside the house. The partially clothed body of her new husband, Neil, was found with tie-down straps that had hooks positioned around a doorknob. It was ruled a sexual asphyxiation.
Death by exuberance.
They had been married for less than 4 months.
Now,
I'm not sure I believe this is what happened.
well, if he's into that, the people do come up with, from what I can tell, creative ways to take part in that, which is a very dangerous thing to do by yourself. I've never understood why you would want to take yourself to the brink of unconsciousness in a setup that might, you may kill yourself by accident, right? But yeah, I mean, this is how it goes.
Well, maybe he died doing what he loved. Himself.
You think that works?
What?
That makes it so much better if you're almost blacking out from lack of oxygen?
Why are you asking me?
Why? I don't know.
Do I look like somebody who wants to black out?
Well, see, this used to happen to me at my fattest when we would make whoopee.
You would black out? It's just because you were out of breath.
Yeah, it's because I couldn't get any oxygen.
Poor guy.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know. I often wondered, I was like, is he dead?
that's right.
No.
That sweats, the meat sweats.
You. Look, if you're trying to retract listeners,
No,
it's working.
no, I'm trying to bring it back to get the old juice back.
I think they've had enough of your juice.
We can title this episode "Old Juice."
No. In October of 1980, after a short courtship, Keller remarried a woman from a wealthy Moultrie family. Of course, he would marry someone who had money this time. No one expected to open the newspaper on November 25th of 1980 and see the headline, "Missing Valdosta Woman's Body Found."
Oh my gosh.
The body was discovered buried in a steel-covered wooden box on Monday, November 24th of 1980 at around 5 p.m. by the Blanton brothers. The farmers were using a tractor and a claw to unearth pine trees. Dentures found inside the box were a 90% match to Hellen Hanks' dental records. The box was described as a 4 by 3 by 3 and was buried about 18 inches underground.
That sounds like that poster box that
think-
went missing.
You think?
Yeah.
It was also believed that if the box had been buried about 6 inches deeper, it probably would never have been discovered. We'll get to that later. The location of Hellen Hanks' body was a 6-mile drive from the Wilcox Outdoor Advertising office and the warehouse located in Valdosta. The Lowndes County Sheriff's Office, along with the Valdosta Police and the State Crime Lab, carefully excavated the box. Sieves were used to screen the soil for fine bits of evidence. And this was quite an undertaking, trying to excavate this box without damaging evidence. And you got to think, I mean, this is back in 1980, so they were working with rudimentary types of tools.
Right.
Probably not the special equipment they have today.
Well, yeah, and I'm guessing that it probably got rolled up out of the ground by this equipment these farmers were using, so it could already be quite disturbed at that point. I guess they're taking pains to maybe, recover any evidence that might be available.
Helen's missing persons case was now a homicide investigation. Overnight, about 80% of the victim's skeletal remains were recovered. Along with the body was a C&S bank bag, 2 metal cash boxes, and a bundle of papers dated 1972. Personal items included a green dress and a string of green beads, the clothing Helen had been seen wearing on the day she vanished. A ring, sandals, pantyhose, underwear, and a bra were also found inside the box. The box was similar to the one that was reported missing a week after Helen's disappearance, missing from the Wilcox warehouse.
It's the same box.
And by the way, she's nude, so these clothing items are not on her body.
They were just put in there with her.
Yes, and it looked like someone had used scissors to cut the dress and to cut these items from her body.
Well, okay, I'm curious to see how reinvigorated this investigation becomes at this point, because it really points to a very specific set of circumstances in my mind.
Around 7 p.m., just hours after the body was located, a call was placed to Keller Wilcox from the sheriff's office. Keller will say initially that he thought it was some kind of prank. Over the years, he alleged receiving numerous phone calls stating that Hellen Hanks had been found. Keller was actually escorted by officers to the dig site.
That seems inappropriate.
It does seem odd. I have to also mention that Keller was friends with the Blanton brothers who found this body. But they did not own this chunk of land at the time of Helen's disappearance. They had only bought it like within the last, couple years.
Years later.
Yeah.
Okay.
From a woman who owned it.
But he knew the guys who found the body.
Yes. They had actually been, I believe, groomsmen or something in his wedding.
Oh, so he knew them well.
Like, he knew them really well. Yeah. David Hanks, who is now in the Navy, requested leave from his Norfolk Naval Base and drove straight home. Hellen Hanks' remains had been taken to Moultrie for further examination by the state's crime lab. They had a pathologist there. It was assumed Helen had been killed around the time she went missing. Law enforcement decided to focus on employees at Wilcox, narrowing down this list to about 12 suspects. The employees were they had to be tracked down for one, because this had been, 8 years later. Many of these employees were now retired.
Or moved on.
A lot of them were like elderly men who had been working there for 30 or 40 years, right? And so by now they're in their 70s and they've moved out of state. So it did take a while to track down these folks, but they were given lie detector tests. More details emerged, such as Helen's clothing items that had been found outside the box. So again, this indicates she'd been buried nude. Someone had cut the dress from her body, as I mentioned, and removed her underwear. The theory was that someone who worked at the company or had knowledge of its operations had killed Hellen Hanks.
Wow, it'd been crazy if someone had applied this mindset to the scene at the time of her disappearing. Wouldn't that be crazy?
Yeah.
If they rounded up everyone who may, in her sphere, in her orbit, that might have, had access to her or known about the company or the warehouse.
Well, I mean, it does sound like they interviewed employees and spoke to people at the time.
Yeah, they did run. It sounds like they did do a decent job of running down each lead.
But at the time, they didn't know they were dealing with a homicide.
Right. I guess that changes.
I guess it kind of changes things when you think about it, Dylan. James Hanks gave a statement in which he dismissed the former police chief in 1972. He said, quote, "He made a statement at the time that she probably went to Florida. I'd like somebody to tell that SOB she didn't go there."
Damn.
The investigation was delayed when law enforcement had to wait for old employment records to arrive in the mail from Baton Rouge, since Wilcox had been affiliated with Lamar Advertising. After an extensive search, law enforcement, again, they were having difficulty locating these former employees because no employees from 1972 worked at the company in 1980. I kind of covered that already. The investigation continued into the spring of 1981. A witness had been located in Helen, Georgia, who might offer potential information regarding the case, but sadly that turned out to be a dead end. The exact cause of death had still not been determined. It appears that time was not on the investigators' side. Based on interviews with friends and family, It was said that Hellen had been unhappy in her position at Wilcox. There was also mention of sexual harassment. Hellen had told friends she was afraid of Keller Wilcox, who inappropriately touched or grabbed her at the office. Hellen admitted to her female friends that she had slapped him when, he had touched her rear end.
Well, yeah, and she should.
I'm glad she slapped him. I hope she slapped the shit out of him.
In front of people.
Yeah. On Friday, July 3rd, 1981, around 3:30 a.m., the doorbell rang at 2403 Riverside Drive in Valdosta, the home of Keller Wilcox. When he answered the door, Sheriff Robert Carter and police, the investigator who's now the police chief, Lois Arnold, were present. The men then informed him they needed to talk and asked if he wanted a lawyer. Keller was like, why would I need one? Like, I've spoken to you guys over the years and I've never needed a lawyer. And that's when Carter replied they had a warrant issued for his arrest in the murder of Hellen Hanks.
Damn. So they're moving forward with charges.
That's when Keller agreed he would consult with a lawyer. For weeks, rumors had made their way around Valdosta that Keller and Foxy Wilcox had murdered Hellen Hanks. The day before his arrest, Keller had been out of town. When he had returned, his wife Sonia told him about these rumors.
Talking about I've been hearing stuff.
Everybody said you killed that woman and put her somewhere. I mean, can you... Again, I'm just thinking about your spouse hearing these stories, probably finding them to be a little outrageous.
Well, yeah.
And then you come home and your spouse shares with you, hey, everybody thinks you killed somebody.
Damn, could you imagine?
No. In addition to Keller's arrest, his 73-year-old father, Foxy, was taken into custody along with two black former employees, 79-year-old Ed Rentz and Lorenzo Marshall, who was 69. The three had been charged with hindering the apprehension of a criminal, specifically helping to remove or bury the victim. The three were arraigned and given $25,000 bonds. Keller Wilcox was arraigned separately and given a $100,000 bond. By midday, Keller and Foxy were free. A rich aunt had posted bond for both men, but the two black individuals remained behind bars, unable to come up with the money.
And that's how it always works.
I was going to say, isn't that how it works? Members of the business community were in disbelief, saying that they could not believe Keller Wilcox could commit such a crime. They also said it was, quote, political suicide for the lawmen to accuse members of a prominent family in Valdosta.
Is that a threat?
I suppose.
Political suicide. For us to... They're not...
Do our job.
I'm sure they knew the potential blowback from the community when you have a high-profile citizen involved in something like this. So I'm sure they're not doing this for the hell of it.
Right?
This is where the evidence has led them.
I think it just goes to show these people think they're like above the law because they're moneyed. Like, just because you have money doesn't mean that you're special.
Well, and they're used to getting preferential treatment most of the time, honestly.
Foxy Wilcox told the press, quote, "We are not guilty," but Keller refused to comment on the case. Famed Georgia trial attorney Bobby Lee Cook was retained to assist in the defense of Keller and Foxy. He was a slick Southern lawyer in a seersucker suit who rode around in a chauffeured Rolls Royce.
Yes.
He would defend Wayne Williams and Jim Williams, if you're familiar with the Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil story, which we've actually covered the Wayne Williams and the Jim Williams cases here on Mountain Murders.
Wayne Williams is a Atlanta child murder?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a 1986 article with the LA Times, Cook boasted of winning 90% of the 300 murder cases he had defended.
Wow.
Valdosta residents agreed on one thing. It was an us versus them kind of case. Wilcox represented the upper crust of society, while Hellen Hanks was just regular folk. So a lot of people really did feel like it was rich versus poor. And would they get justice? Or would money save Keller Wilcox.
If he's not guilty, I mean.
Well, yeah, but you're in the South in some small, little town. Who's to say you couldn't pay off a judge? I mean, that's the kind of thing people think because that sort of stuff happened back in the day, right?
Well, yeah, and you see that in even nowadays, local authorities reluctant to bring charges in certain cases because of who they involve. That happens all the time.
Right, and I'm sure it was more prominent back then. The Wilcox family could get away with it, most people felt. Most of the well-to-do in town refused to believe that one of their own had committed murder, and even if they did believe it, they wanted him to get away with it.
Ooh.
Which is gross.
That's gross. She should just let him slap her on the butt.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, what?
She was asking for it. She wore a green dress to work.
I think that kind of sexual harassment in public, at work, or anything is very, very disgusting. And it's it's way worse than I think a lot of people realize.
Well, it's really humiliating and degrading to the person being harassed.
Well, just someone who's capable of that lets me know that they're capable of much worse, because I think it's a pretty terrible thing to do to someone.
Well, and you also have to consider Helen's working in a male-dominated field.
Right.
She's the only female employee there. Everyone else is male. So when the boss is getting away with harassing her, that kind of opens her up to harassment from anyone.
It's disgusting behavior.
And employees might know, like, well, I can do whatever I want to her because if she goes to the boss, he's not going to do anything about it. He's doing it too.
No, and that's a good point.
In an unexpected turn of events, Ed Rentz had been granted immunity and would become a key witness for the prosecution. Rentz was nearly deaf, functionally illiterate with a third-grade education, and was not the ideal witness. The state's case would rely heavily on his testimony. During the committal hearing in July of 1981, Rentz admitted that he had dug a hole at the command of Foxy and Keller Wilcox with the help of Lorenzo Marshall. He was driven there in a yellow pickup truck by the Wilcox men off a dirt road. He couldn't exactly remember where.
Now, these guys are too lazy to even dig their own hole, right? They got to bring in somebody, a laborer, to dig the hole for them. I mean, really?
Yeah. After 45 minutes, it started raining, so they all left. He couldn't recall exactly when, like the date or anything like that, but he recalled that in the next day or two, they returned to the site to continue digging. The hole was described as being a little less than waist deep, and after finishing, the four men returned to the warehouse to fetch a box. Rentz knew the box contained Hellen Hanks' body. He and Marshall had been told to put her in the box.
Damn. See, you should have came forward a long time ago.
He went on to describe how the legs were separate from the body and that they had been wrapped like packages. We're going to get to this in a minute. The box, he said, had been the type used at Wilcox Advertising to be placed on the back of a truck to hold posting paper. The defense implied Rentz was fabricating the story, and during cross-examination, his story stayed the same. Like, he was pretty solid in the story during this preliminary hearing, if you will.
Well, and given his level of education and maybe not being the sharpest tool in the drawer, I think that speaks volume, that his account remains consistent.
On September 4th, a grand jury indicted Keller Wilcox on charges of murder and concealing a death. Foxy and Lorenzo Marshall were indicted on charges of concealing a death. Prosecutors didn't know how Helen was killed, but they felt it was a sex crime. Helen's clothes had been ripped from her body, and she was found nude. Dr. Park Elliott Dietz, a psychiatrist and faculty member at Harvard Medical School, examined the details of the case at the time and concluded the evidence strongly suggested it was a sexually motivated crime. But due to the decay of Helen's body, obviously she'd been on the ground for 8 years, they were unable to determine if she had been sexually assaulted.
Right, and her body hadn't been embalmed or anything like that, so
right.
I'm sure decomposition was very, very, very advanced.
The prosecutor chose not to pursue the death penalty for Keller Wilcox. Some of the state's witnesses were Helen's friends, including Dorothy Edwards and Cora Arduengo, who recalled that 2 days before her disappearance, Helen had confided in them that she was afraid of Keller after he had sexually harassed her. Helen had also mentioned she was keeping 2 sets of books, and she did not like the position that she was in.
So
She said she didn't really understand like what these 2 sets of books were, but she also was smart enough to know like this is shady.
right. They're having her help cook the books. I mean, there's no other reason to have 2 sets of books.
Right. Another employee, Jerry Davis, now he was mentioned in the beginning of the story. He testified that he had seen some kind of argument between Keller and Helen. It's so confusing with the names. John Goodman, another employee, testified that he had seen Helen push Keller Wilcox's hand out of the way. He said, quote, "I thought he was a feeling on her."
Oh, God.
Yeah. Afterwards, Keller called Helen a dumb bitch. Now, at the time, Goodman let it slide because Keller cussed quite a bit, not only at Helen, but at like all of the employees. So he was just kind of like, that's just how Keller talks to everybody. Like he calls everybody like, you're a dumb son of a bitch, you're a bitch. Which, I mean, he shouldn't be talking to his employees that way.
He said things like, "Let me touch your titties."
I'm going to be feeling on you.
Man, what a creep.
I know. Again, I think he's got this like entitlement, like, don't you know who my dad is? Like, because he has money and grew up with money, he thinks he can just get away with whatever. That he can grab on a married woman
Yeah.
in a workplace.
That's disgusting.
Unwelcomed advances. I mean, come on, you're married. You're recently married at the time.
And how lame do you have to be to try to push yourself on someone who has no interest in you?
I know, right?
It's so lame.
Ew. Lucy, who was 15 at the time of her mother's disappearance, recalled that Helen was upset one day after work. Helen had said she had to slap her boss because he had made a pass at her. Jean, Keller's ex-wife, took to the stand. She recalled how on the evening of Helen's disappearance, Keller called to say he would be late for dinner at the Ocean Pond Club. Keller and Foxy were 2 hours late, and then after dinner, Keller said he needed to go back to the office while his wife stayed home, and she did not know what time he returned. Therefore, she could not supply him with any kind of alibi for the evening.
So does that fit into the other man's testimony that it was raining, they stopped digging left, and then came back later and finished it?
It goes along with it.
Kind of fits in there.
Yeah. Jean also testified that her husband wasn't very good with a shovel. That she had to dig most of the holes to plant bushes in their yard.
So they would not be able to dig the hole without help from someone else.
Well, she was basically saying that her ex-husband was like a weak little bitch who couldn't even dig a hole.
Damn.
That she's got to dig the hole. The prosecutors thought this point drove home that Keller had help burying Helen's body. Jean also went on to say that Keller often used the agency's employees as, quote, yard help. So because you're an employee at my company, you just have to come over and do whatever chore I order you to do. I mean, can you imagine if your supervisor was like, you need to come over here and cut my grass?
No.
What the hell? Buried with Helen had been a key. It was discovered, it was actually one of 2 keys that worked the ignition for Keller's truck.
Really?
The yellow work truck that was driven out to the site, according to Ed Rentz. It was implied that Keller had driven the truck with the other key, and the second key had been buried with Helen.
By accident, you reckon?
Probably, yeah. Well, remember, he was desperate to find a set of keys.
Yeah.
Different keys for the office. The most important witnesses, Ed Rentz and Lorenzo Marshall, were saved for the final days of trial. Rentz indicated that Marshall was the man who helped Keller Wilcox bury the body. Marshall told the jury that he had actually been in Albany, Georgia at the time of Helen's murder, and that he had been in Keller's truck until Friday. However, witnesses described that the truck was parked at the ad agency on Thursday when Hellen was missing, and Marshall had not been in Albany. He had been in the office.
So he's trying to distance himself.
Marshall implied his confession had been coerced initially and that he really didn't have anything to do with this case. But he did recall details on the stand 8 years later that he seemed to have forgotten the week after Hellen had gone missing.
Oh.
So what he told investigators in 1972 was very different from what he remembered in 1980. Because like in 72, he didn't remember he'd been out of town with this truck. But
Right.
8 years later, suddenly he remembered the dates of being out of town, where he'd been. He was driving this truck. I was nowhere near anybody when this happened. So it's pretty clear that, like, he's lying and, you know, I mean, maybe he had been paid off or something. The Wilcoxes have money.
Well, they have money. These are black gentlemen in the South. You have a powerful family, moneyed family, and, you know, kind of a insular community of sorts.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's kind of it would be their word against theirs if they were to come forward. So I guess it kind of makes sense of why they never said anything back in the day, maybe.
Ed Rentz admitted that he and Marshall had dug a hole at the direction of Foxy and Keller. They were taken to the site in the truck driven by Keller. The digging was interrupted by rain, that they had placed Mrs. Hanks' body into a box that was taken from the warehouse. He testified that she was, quote, stiff, meaning rigor mortis had set in at that point. Rentz also stated that Hellen's legs had been cut up. Remember, he said they were like in packages?
Yeah.
Well, at the time, investigators didn't know that was the case, like when they first found her body, and then he's telling them this. But this detail would later be confirmed by a pathologist in Atlanta that, yeah, they had severed her legs.
Probably
There
see
were
tool marks on the bones.
Yes, exactly. There
Yes.
were cut marks. And they had actually not known this until Ed's confession. And then the pathologist took a look at it and said, yeah. So again, this is like a detail that only someone involved would know.
That's pretty damning information right there.
The case against Keller was based on bits and pieces of evidence. I mean, there was no real smoking gun. Keller did testify in his own defense. Dylan, the jury deliberated for 2 hours. What do you think?
Guilty.
It was considered a very short time considering the crime and the complexity of the evidence, especially the fact that it's circumstantial evidence. You know, everybody thought it would take the jury a while to debate these details kind of back and forth. Keller Wilcox was found guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. Foxy Wilcox was found guilty but died shortly after. So he didn't really suffer the consequences. And in all honesty, I don't know what happened to the two black gentlemen. I know Rentz had immunity, but I don't know what happened to Lorenzo Marshall.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't see any information about that. Now, in 1987, Keller's sentence was overturned on appeal. He had actually filed appeal in 85. He ended up being out of prison for a period of time, 18 months or something. But then he was ordered back to prison because his life sentence was given again, but with the option for parole. After serving years in prison, Keller wrote a note in 2006 stating that he had killed Hellen. However, he said they had a heated argument and he lost his temper. Keller wrote that he had not been present when the body was buried. Afterwards, after the murder, he had phoned his father saying, he had killed Hellen accidentally and that Foxy Wilcox had taken care of the rest. Keller Wilcox was released from prison in 2008.
What?
A condition of his parole included that he was not allowed to return to the county in which the crime occurred. However, in 2017, this was lifted.
I can't even believe this piece of shit got out of jail.
Yeah, I know. James Hanks died in 2001. Lucy, Hellen's daughter, passed away in 2017. David Hanks wrote a novel titled The Disappearance, which was loosely based on his mother's story. For my case today, my main resource was William Rawlings' 6 Inches Deeper, which again is a reference to the fact that if they had buried the body just 6 inches deeper, probably wouldn't have been found.
Right.
I watched an episode of On the Case with Paula Zahn, and of course, various newspaper articles. There were quite a bit over the years, from the 70s when she disappeared to 1980, the trial, the appeal. I mean, there's like a lot of information out there.
Okay. What a crazy story.
It is, right?
What a damn stupid reason for a poor woman to be murdered.
And by such a piece of shit.
Taken away from her family, and then, you know, they get to act flabbergasted when it all comes out, you know?
And then this douche nozzle gets released.
And then other rich people's like, oh my God, there's no way.
There's no justice and justice being served here.
Oh my God. Why do you let your black speak? What the fuck, dude?
Hey, you. I know you're supposed to be putting up a billboard, but I need you to get over to my house and paint it.
And dig a hole.
And dig a hole. Help me bury this. I mean, just this kind of attitude that these men had, that they could get away with anything, that these employees were like servants to them.
Yeah, I know.
It's ridiculous.
It's disgusting. And if I was rich, I would never act like that. So, and speaking of being rich, I would like to thank Tattooed and Employed for supporting this week's episode.
You were responsible for everything said on today's episode.
That's right.
It's all your fault.
It's all your fault. And thank you so much for supporting us over at the Patreons. Appreciate you.
We do appreciate it. And if you are interested in joining us at patreon.com/mountainburnerspodcast, we always welcome your support.
Yes, we do.
Helps us keep the lights
We
on.
dropped an ep not that long ago. It was a fun little episode. And yeah, just have so much fun over there.
Yeah, actually, I have a very good case that we will be dropping on Patreon this week.
Oh.
Yeah.
Damn.
You didn't know that, did you?
It's like a full episode.
Drop the bomb on you.
And see, we don't just get over there and be silly. Sometimes Heather drops full cases up in there.
We talk about all kinds of stuff on Patreon.
That's right. I'm talking about my toe fungus.
No.
Sometimes.
You do that on the main.
It's gone.
You do that on the main podcast.
You want to see?
No. What are you talking about?
Putting it on you.
Stop rubbing your toe on me.
It's scratchy.
Please stop.
Okay.
This is why we don't have more popularity, Dylan.
You think it's my toes?
I think it's you. I think you're turning people off
Oh.
with your disgusting bullshit.
Oh. Well, it cleared up. So.
I'm reconsidering whether or not I would be upset if you went missing at this moment.
Now, can we talk about, we've been watching some missing shows. I'm not even going to say which one. Just, you know, the run of.
Well, I'm always interested in missing persons cases.
Yeah. And some of them are pretty like wild. You're like, oh, you know, it doesn't add up. What happened? You kind of can think about it and talk about what you thought might happen. But we've noticed on some of those, which is true on most, especially the short 30-minute true crime episodes of various sorts.
But I've noticed it with some podcasters as well.
There's a lot of
sanitizing the story.
And I understand to a degree, but you'll be watching a story and you'll be like, wow, this doesn't add up at all. But then if you know all this other information, it really puts the case in perspective.
Well, yeah, we were watching an episode earlier of a missing persons case, and it just seemed really random. A young woman seemed to have some sort of fight with her friends. They left her at a bar. She refused to go with them, and then she walked off and vanished.
Right.
So, of course, you're thinking, like, what in the world happened? Like, this doesn't really make sense. There's a little bit of security footage showing the direction in which she, took off. But as I'm doing my own research online, because I'm like, I want to know more about this case. Is there an update? Like, this is an odd story. I came across all this other information that had been left out of the show. Like, she had a pretty extensive criminal background.
Right.
It was like a known drug user. This area where she vanished, I guess, was kind of known for drugs and these sort of seedy motels where there were a lot of sex workers trafficking heavy in the area. It was also like an industrial area with a lot of truckers.
Yeah, it looked pretty creepy.
So she could have been picked up by a trucker. I mean, who knows?
And it's like one in the morning. She refuses, according to her friends, offers of rides home. Let's get you home, whatever. Call your mom, and you're just like, why in the world would you do that? But then if you know that she, and that's not to say that someone who uses drugs or had a criminal history deserves anything bad.
No, I think they know we're not saying that.
But
it's just those are pretty big details.
Yeah.
That not only did she have a history of being arrested for drugs, but also for violent behavior. Like she'd tried to run someone over with a car.
Right.
I mean, she had been arrested a couple of times for violence, had been ordered to undergo anger management, was described as having this sort of erratic, explosive temper, which could have been brought on by drug use. I mean, who knows? But I'm just like, those are pretty big details to leave out of a story. And I find that with a lot of those shows, but also with some podcasts I've listened to in the past.
It's dishonest.
It is. And I get like wanting to maybe preserve the victim's memory, or, you don't want to like blame them or come off as like painting them like in a certain light. But at the same time, you have to be authentic in your storytelling.
Right.
Right?
You do.
Like omitting facts and details like that, it's not helpful.
Well, and I think it's as an egregious act as adding or embellishing details. I think it really matters, and it matters to the people who are listening, trying to draw a conclusion or figure out what's going on in that case.
Yeah, I agree, because if you're going to present a story, you have to present it all, even the ugly parts of the story.
Yes, you have to include the warts.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, it's for people who are true crime
They know.
folks, I mean, I'm sure our listeners understand what we're talking about. But I just appreciate when you get honesty.
Well, and I think some of the biggest podcast series out there, it's that authenticity that really make it hit and really make it a sensation. Is people just know that you are getting all the little pieces and details, and you can kind of comb through it yourself and try to really figure out what's going on. And I think that's what really makes some of these pod series, things like that, blow up, like Mountain Murders is going to do.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm gonna I guess go back a little bit. I was giving James Hanks a bit of a hard time. Like, how do you not go to your wife's memorial? How do you move this other woman in? How you divorce her? Like,
right.
Kind of do all this stuff that seems kind of underhanded. But, I have to say, this man truly thought his wife had just run off and left him and ditched him.
He was hurt.
He was hurt.
And if you put it in that light and in that perspective, it all makes sense.
Right. And it seems like he was blown away when her body was found. Like, he really didn't believe she was dead.
He thought she had just left him.
Yeah.
And left him in a lurch financially and all that. And he was like, well, screw her. He's mad.
Yeah.
And that's sad. And then to have that realization later on, gosh, that must have been like a ton of bricks.
Yeah. All right, Dylan. Well, thank you for sitting down with me today to discuss Hellen Hanks's case.
Thanks for having me.
You're a welcomed guest on the show, Dylan.
And then I'm going to
one day we'll make you a permanent host.
Okay.
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 Permanent co-host.
That's cool. As long as it doesn't
We'll stop making you like a guest star of the show.
As long as it doesn't make me too much responsibility. We need to.
Well, no,
all that.
we know you're not gonna do anything else.
And I want you to know right now.
You know what's really funny? Dylan will come up. He has ideas. He'll be like, "We should cover," and he'll give me some ideas for the pod, or he'll suggest something, and I'm like, "Oh, that's great, Dylan. You should put that together." And you're like, "Nope,
I can't.
We just won't do it."
That's a great idea.
Like, it's a great idea. It sounds like a lot of work for somebody. You should take that on. And you're like, nope.
Yeah. Well, just right quick, if you are going to make me a full-blown employee, I want you to know I am open to sexual harassment advances. on your part. So if you want
Look, this is a professional podcast.
yeah. It is, you want to fill me up?
This is in no way an amateur podcast.
No.
By two people who don't know what the fuck they're doing and just started it randomly 7 years ago. This is for real.
Okay.
Okay. And we have policies against that type of thing.
Oh.
And as a matter of fact, I need to take this opportunity to reprimand you for last week when you showed up in those short shorts and I could like see your balls smushing into the chair. That was inappropriate. And you really need to think about the attire that you wear when we're podcasting. You can't show up to the office like that anymore.
Baby. So you want me to wear those shorts every episode?
You're the reason we don't have video
You think so?
at present. That and I can't figure out how my camera works. All right, Dylan, it's been great chatting with you. We'll be back in a few days with our midweek.
Yes, we will.
As always, we love our listeners.
We do.
We hope you have a great week. Bye.
Bye.